Hello and welcome back to the studio. A little while ago somebody mentioned to me about painting in a slightly different style. If you've seen any of my other paintings, you know that I'm a fan of Bob Ross and the wet on wet painting in technique in particular, but I do like a challenge. Now, they mentioned the name Bill Alexander. I know that Bill was a mentor to Bob, so a lot of Bob's techniques originated with Bill. And I thought, let's see if I can find something that Bill has painted. And as luck would have it, I was walking around a little bookshop and there on a table was this, a Bill Alexander painting book. So I've been studying his technique and style, and he has a wonderful energy about firing colour into a canvas. If you've watched any of his videos, they're incredibly engaging. So I thought, let's paint something from the imagination, not necessarily exactly what Bill would have painted, but mimicking his techniques to see what it looks like. So, you know the routine. Sit back, relax, and let's see if we can imagine a Bill Alexander original. Happy painting, people. Fingers crossed. So here's my canvas, 16 by 20, portrait style. Today I'm doing a Bill Alexander painting, but I'm going to start off with a Bob Ross liquid white. Bill called it magic white. I don't have any Bill Alexander brushes, but I have some Bob Ross brushes. A nice new 1-inch brush and an older 1-inch brush. I've got a filbert brush, a liner brush and a fan brush. That was all in the wrong order, never mind. And I've got a Bob Ross palette knife, all very similar to Bill's. And of course, a Bob Ross 2-inch brush. You don't see this very often, but it's really nice and soft and good for blending. The first thing I want to do is work out my horizon line. I think I'll use this 1-inch brush as a measure. I'll use the whole length of the brush from the base of the canvas and use a little map pin. I'll put one here and one over there. And in a blink of an eye, it's done. I keep my liquid white in a small airtight container in the freezer. This keeps it fresh and ready for painting. You see, I'm going to be using my old 1-inch brush to apply this. I know it's my old brush because it's got a little orange tip on the end of the handle. I apply it very thinly. You don't want it too much, just enough to make the canvas wet. When you think you've covered everything, make sure you finish off with some long flat strokes to even out the surface. I made a video all about this and I'll drop a link in the description below. For my first ever Bill Alexander painting, I'm going to be using this limited palette of colours. Titanium white, black, phthalo blue and some mauve. Yes, this is a Bob Ross colour from the floral paint set. I'll give it a try. Now, back with that same 1-inch brush which I applied the liquid white with, I'm going to go straight into the phthalo blue colour. Give it a good stir around. I'll deal with that runny paint in a second. Now, Bill was famous for firing colour onto a canvas. I'm going to try and imitate his style. I'm going to use the same bold flamboyant brush strokes, really working the paint into the canvas. My poor old brush doesn't know what's hit it, but it's my old brush, so I don't mind giving it a bit of a workout. I want quite a loose and impressionistic background in this colour. Now, let's work it out a little further. Time to switch to some mauve. I noticed that Bill used mauve colours and orange colours straight out the tube, so that's why I've used one of my Bob Ross paints. And again, 3, 2, 1, and fire it into the canvas again. I'm just going to stab these colours together and just loosely mix them. I'll come back and blend them in a moment. I'm going to use this 2-inch Bob Ross brush to blend my sky. Nice flat long strokes. I'll just pick off the broken bits of brush as I go. But I want to leave a lot of the little bits of detail on there. Well, as I say, it was quite an explosive start to my painting, and well, it leaves me feeling quite puffed out actually. I kind of need a bit of a break already. That's it. That's enough. Time for a cup of tea. Let's dive straight into a mountain. For this, I'm going to get some titanium white. I'm going to take a little phthalo blue and marble it together. Let's add a touch of mauve, just for fun. I don't know if there's any specific colour I'm looking for, just a sort of light marble mix, blue-purple colour. We'll see how that looks when it hits the canvas. I'm going to take a little roll and pick a point about here and just press it down into the canvas. The way Bill Alexander paints a mountain is very different to the way Bob did it. Bob would obviously put a dark undercoat on and apply highlights and shadows. Bill's technique, you just go straight in with colour and see what you get. Again, I'm thinking about where the light is coming from, which is on the right, and just sort of smooshing the colours together. It's quite an abstract design, so you do have to have a little bit of imagination when you're doing this, and just let the paint flow. It's actually quite a lot of fun, but I would imagine some people might find this very daunting. I'm not actually using a reference photograph or anything that Bill painted for this. I'm just following my nose. I figure that's the best way to learn. These soft pastel colours lend themselves to being a more distant mountain range, so I'll just tap out the base here and then see if I can add a darker range of mountains in front. But maybe a little snow to start with. Again, this technique differs from the way Bob did it. We're just letting the paint lay in sort of drifts and chunks and layers, letting some of the background peek through here and there. So again, it requires a sort of certain amount of confidence with what you're doing. You just have to let the paint do its own thing. Here you see I'm working on another range of mountains a little closer, so I've added a little more dark black to my mixture. Again, you see I just smoosh and push it around and just let the paint do its own thing. I vary my colours quite a bit. Occasionally more purple, occasionally more blue, occasionally more black. I just letting the paint blend together naturally on the canvas. Let's add a little more snow. Maybe I'll use a bit more of the Bob Ross technique for this and try and get a little bit more of a break going in the paint. So this is a bit of a hybrid. A bit Bob, a bit Bill. I think overall, between the two techniques, you can achieve quite a realistic looking mountain. If I think there's a little bit more dark needed, I'll just go and push some back in. There. And then just work that in to the background. I'll tap out the base of this mountain to make a nice misty layer. Ready for some trees. I'm going to carry on using my old 1-inch brush. It's already got quite a lot of paint on it already. So I'm going into some blue and some mauve and some black. And what I'm trying to do is to get the edge of the brush to come to a really like a chiselled edge. This was how Bill would paint his background trees. I'll work this until I think I've got it as stuck together as I can. Yeah, let's give that a try. Now, the technique is very similar, just tapping and striking down gently. I think my old 1-inch brush is just a bit too, worn out to chisel the edge, so let's try swapping it for a new one, see if I can get that one to chisel. Yeah, I think soft bristles might be the answer. Now, I've groomed the two of them very well, and I can't make them chisel properly. It doesn't seem to matter how much paint I use, they just spring apart. But let's give it a try. And, well, I can get something similar, but I have to keep continuously reloading to knit the bristles together. This is after about 3 or 4 goes at loading my brush. And I've used an awful lot of paint. And I think the end results are, well, a little indifferent, let's say that. I'm not that pleased with them, and I really can't get this brush to hold its shape properly. I'm going to switch to my old favourite, a Bob Ross fan brush. Loaded well with paint. I know I can control this a little better and get a bit more definition on those distant fir trees. My 2-inch brush is the only brush I have left that's clean enough to tap out the base. I'll use the corner of it just to flick up the tops of these trees, make a little more detail. Let's add another layer of fir trees, a little darker this time. More blue, more black, more mauve. I'll leave this gap on the side for a bigger tree. Now, let's pull down some reflections. I'm going to use my 2-inch brush here, and you see I give it a little wiggle. I want those bristles just to dig into the paint, and then press firmly and pull straight down. The trees on the right are a little taller, so I sort of have a bit more of a pull to try and extend them a little longer. Then brush across, edge to centre of course. There. Now, let's add some sort of frosty land. I'm going to pick up a small roll of titanium white paint. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean, but just something I can rub into the canvas. I'm going to let the paint break and land where it wants to. I'm not going to try and smooth this out too much. I just want it to look sort of rough at this stage. I've tidied up my palette. It was getting in a bit of a pickle. I'm going to mix up a nice dark colour. Some black, some phthalo blue, and a good chunk of this mauve. I want a good dark deep base colour here for a big fir tree on the left. I'm going to use my fan brush for this. I know Bill would use a 1-inch brush or even a 2-inch brush, but I just can't seem to make mine work the same way. No matter how much paint I apply to the brush. I've marked an area which I think would make the end of an island. It's like a little sort of bird's beak shape. And I'm going to load my fan brush very well to a chiselled edge. Let's mark the centre line for a tree. This tells me where my tree starts and where it's going to finish. Sounds a bit obvious, but sometimes trees do run out of shape. Now, let's have a look at this position of this tree. I could start it right here, but that would mean it lines up with the top of these trees and would be a little lost. I want somewhere between the two, the top of those trees and that little peak. So again, position is essential. I think about there would work well. Now, lay your brush at an angle and using just the corner of the brush, just tap and press the bristles into the painting. Let the bristles do the work and make the detail for you. Let's have a closer look. As you can see, I just press the brush in to the canvas. Now here's something which I think we could all learn to do occasionally, because painting trees, especially the tops of these fir trees, is the most challenging part. So I actually painted it twice. Put one on top of the other, and now I can expand the width of the tree at the base to incorporate my practice tree. So there's actually 2 trees for the price of 1 here. I'll add a 3rd tree on the right hand side, but of course in the finished painting you'll only see 2 trees. It's a neat trick and a way to get extra practice. I need a fairly clean dry brush to paint some bushes, so I'll use this brush. It's my old 1-inch brush with the orange tip, but by golly, look how much paint I've got to try and get rid of. After several goes, it's clean enough, I think. I pull my brush one direction through that dark colour, rounded side first. Press into the paint to make your bristles splay apart. Now, push into the canvas and let the brush spread out, but don't let it slide. I want to create this lovely sort of fireworks display of paint. It's very textured and one bush at a time. Press and pull straight down again for some reflections. This reflection needs to be a little deeper for that fir tree. I'm going to go in with my palette knife and just sort of indicate where the centre of this tree is going to be. I'm just rubbing to remove some of the excess paint. This is a little trick I saw Bill doing. He then comes back in with a little bit of grubby white paint, tiny bit, and just touches the centre line of the tree. Here and there. Press and push and slide. I'll do a little bit on this tree too. I dry clean my fan brush and reload again with some titanium white. I'm going to tint this with some mauve colour. I want a soft pastel highlight to look like some sort of mauvish sort of colour snow. Not terribly realistic, I know, but hey, it's my world, and I paint it the way I think it should look. Touch gently to the edge of those branches, a little brighter on the right, because that's where the light's coming from. Here's a nice close-up. Again, don't fill it all in. Leave a little bit of the dark showing through. It makes your tree look far more three-dimensional. Touch and move on. As I work down, I let the paint run out, become more of a shadow. I'll be having some bushes down there later on. I'll do the same with this little tree on the right, but I actually made a little bit of a mess of it here. I just over-highlighted it. So let's do a little repair. I put some dark colour back on my brush and just press back in some of the shadows. It's quite easy to do, really. Now I can highlight the edge of this a little more to make it look like it's standing in front. A little brighter colour is all it's needed. But don't be tempted. Paint it more than once, or twice, or 3 times. If I carry on like this, I'll break it, but I think I'll stop just in time. But it's so easy to overwork them and fiddle with them just one too many times. Now, let's paint some bushes. Highlights this time. I've gone back to my 1-inch brush and dry cleaned it very well and put out some more fresh white paint. Doesn't need to be pure white. I've also added a tiny drop of liquid white to my paint to make it soft. Remember the golden rule. A thin paint sticks to a thick paint. You can see my brush is well loaded but open and lacy. Rounded side to the top again. Now press and push, but don't let the brush slide. I'm going to do this one in slow motion. And I want you to pay special attention to this point here. I press my well-loaded brush onto the canvas gently and allow the bristles to splay apart, but I don't let the brush slide. This is the secret to painting bushes and trees wet on wet in oils. Now to add some snowy land at the base of my trees and bushes. Again, I use my palette knife and just pull at a nice shallow angle. I let the paint break and land where it wants. I let the paint break occasionally just to give the illusion that there is, well, thick snow. Now to enhance my reflections, I'm going to use my 2-inch brush and just get a little tiny touch of that light colour for the snow and pull it down into the reflections. Dry clean your brush and then brush once across. But don't do it more than once. That soft white paint will smear and smudge everything. I'm going to use my palette knife and a little more touch of that white paint to cut in some waterlines. I'll also add a few of the famous scratchy sticks and twigs with the point of my knife. I've even add a few extra little details from yours truly. I like to use my knife and let it sort of slide through that paint and push up and sort of create lots of little extra detailed grasses on my painting. Don't go away though. I haven't quite finished this painting and I want to do a little bit of a review of the technique. So here we are. This is the following day after my initial painting, and I've had a good chance to look at my painting with a fresh pair of eyes, always very important. Now, there are some elements about my painting I quite like, and 1 or 2 things which I really need to sort of just fine tune, particularly I think where those background trees meet the land. It looks a little bit sort of sharp and not nicely finished. I'll do a better review of my painting once I've done that, and I'll give you my opinions on the techniques and how they differ and what I think I took from it and what you might find interesting for your own paintings. Time for a few small changes and repairs to my painting. I put out yet more titanium white paint and I dry clean my fan brush a little bit. I'm going to take just a small amount of paint here, just a touch, just to do a little bit of a, well, sort of a touch up on this back edge here. I want to just refine this edge a little more. I'm going to go in, press and give it a little upward flick. I want to create the illusion of some little, well, tree trunks or little grasses and bushes way back in my painting. It's a small touch, but I think this is where you can improve the quality of your work tremendously. Pay careful attention to all these little details I also decided to smooth out some of these snowbanks in the distance. I don't think you'd see that much detail there. I'm going to just use my fan brush to just sort of tease them together a little bit more. Maybe widen it a little bit more on this right hand side, make it look like it's sort of curving round towards you a little bit more. A few little waterlines, bring it all together. And in the blink of an eye, my painting's finished. So here you have it, the final version of the painting that I dreamt up using the Bill Alexander technique. I did the little repair on the riverbank there and softened things up a little bit, and I'm much happier with it. So, initial thoughts on it. Well, as a very first time using this technique, it was certainly a lot of fun. I enjoyed firing in the colour into the sky, and that loose sort of flamboyant style of just smooshing the paint on to make a mountain. It was good fun for an experienced painter. And that's probably where I would say that I think I probably had kind of like the most sort of misgivings really. I think for a complete beginner, just firing colour in and being so bold might just put a few people off. You might just find it just a little bit sort of too sort of like in your face. Bob's method was certainly a little more gentle. So that's something I think needs to be taken into account. I love the effect on the mountain. And again, I think that sort of bit of experience I've got, some 20 odd years, helps. Maybe for a complete beginner, again, you might find that just a little bit daunting. I don't know whether the brushes are different, but I certainly struggled a little bit to paint these trees as you saw. And my goodness, I used up a ton of paint trying to make my brush work. And again, it could just be the brushes are different. I don't know how that could affect things, but maybe it did. But I certainly got through a lot of paint. You see, I went back to using my Bob Ross style to do this fir tree in the end. I really do prefer that style, I think, a little bit more. So, pluses and minuses, fors and against, pros and cons. You take your pick, but I'm rather pleased with my very, very first attempt at doing a Bill Alexander mountain. But don't move, there's another lovely video coming along here. Bob Ross, through and through. Happy painting, people.